The wiggle legs frog. This is a Dave Whitlock pattern, and it's one of my favorite flies for largemouth bass during the summertime, and also smallmouth when I can't throw it at them. Start with any cheap hook that's about 3/4 of an inch in length, and then go ahead and mash any of the bait barbs that might be down there. But don't worry about the hook barb, as we'll be cutting that off later. You'll need 2 of these. Put one of the hooks in the vise. Then load a bobbin with heavy GSP thread. This is Vivus, but any brand's pretty good. Start your thread directly behind the eye and wrap down a bit before cutting the tag end off. Then create a thread base from behind the eye to about halfway between the point and the barb of the hook, and then wrap back up to right behind the eye. Now go to some orange bucktail. Cut a clump that's about half a pencil in width. Strip out any of the short fibers or underfur that you might have cut along with it. Then with the majority of the tips facing out over the eye, go ahead and tie it directly on top of the hook shank. Once secure, go ahead and wrap down about 1/3 of hook shank down over the bucktail, and then cut the rest of the butts down at a downward angle towards the hook shank. Then now you can build up a thread ramp. Now do the same exact thing, but this time with yellow bucktail. You can get a little bit less if you would like. Again, cutting it and getting rid of any of the small fibers or underfur. And this time, go ahead and invert your hook if you can, or just tie it directly under on the underside of the hook. Again, wrap back before cutting the butts down at a downward angle towards the inverted hook shank. This allows a nice thread ramp to be made on either side of the hook. Then advance your thread down towards where your thread ended between the point and the barb. Grab the orange clump of bucktail and pull it tight down towards the bend. Give a couple wraps and then cinch it down tightly. Then do the same to the yellow, doing your best to make sure that it doesn't get caught around the vise or the hook point. Again, give a couple wraps and cinch it down. You'll kind of get like an elongated bullet head out of this. Give a couple more turns of thread and then go ahead and give it a whip finish. Then go ahead and cut your thread off. Go ahead and stroke all the fibers back down, and we're going to create the back half of the leg. And right now we're going to make the tip of the orange deer hair about 2 hook shanks in length, and we're going to cut at an upward 45-degree angle using the hook shank as a base. Now that's a rough cut. Go ahead and take the fly out of the vise, stroke the fibers back again, and continue that cut to make it cleaner. And that's one leg of the frog. You'll need 2. And now go ahead and some bolt cutters or wire cutters and kind of stroke the deer hair up, exposing the hook bend, and cut as much of the hook as you can without worrying the thread or kind of damaging the integrity of the bucktail. Now do the whole process over again, and you'll end up with 2 legs, because frogs have 2 legs. Now go to some 32 gauge beading wire. I found this at Hobby Lobby. Go ahead and get a section that's about 4 or 5 inches long, as it's easier to work in excess. Now go ahead and slide one of the ends through one of the eyes of the legs. And then give a couple turns, 3 or 4 is good, and leave a little bubble around the hook eye to give the leg some wiggle, hence the name Wiggle Legs Frog. And then go ahead and cut it at the final twist. But don't lose the excess wire that you cut, as we can use this again to wrap around the second leg. Now go to size 4 B10S stinger hook. Go ahead and get that hook firmly set in the jaws of your vise. Then again, go ahead with your heavy GSP wrapped directly behind the eye before cutting the tag end off. Now create a nice smooth base down the hook shank, uncording your thread as you go. Now go to some 30-pound monofilament or whatever you like to make your weed guards out of. Again, cut a section that's about 4 or 5 inches in length. With one of the ends, go ahead and mash it down with flat-jawed pliers, as this makes tying easier. Advance your thread slightly down the bend of the hook, just past the barb, and then wrap back up to about behind the point, and tie the monofilament, the pliered section down, the smashed section down, directly on top of the hook and down into the bend, just a little bit. Make sure it's secured. Although not absolutely necessary, I like to add a drop of super glue here. Now go to some yellow deer belly hair. Get a clump that's about a pencil length in width, maybe a little bit bigger. Cut it off, trying to get as long as fibers as you can. Brush out all the underfur. The more you get out, the easier this fly is to tie. Then go ahead and cut the tips off. Go ahead and invert your hook, and making sure not to stab yourself on the sharp point, go ahead and position the hair directly on the underside, or now the top side of the inverted hook. Make sure it stays on the top side of the inverted hook or the bottom side of an uninverted hook with your other hand, and flare it. Now re-invert your hook. Go to about the same clump again. Cut another clump off that's about the same size. Make sure you get all the underfur off, and go ahead and tie that directly on top of the underside clump. Again, flaring it after a couple of collection wraps. Now go to some orange deer belly hair, and cut a section that's just a little bit smaller than the yellow. Maybe 3/4 of a pencil in width. And again, strip out all the underfur. Then cut the tips off. Now lay it directly on top of the yellow and tie it in at the halfway point, just like you did for the 2 yellow previous clumps. Try to keep it on top of the yellow and not let it go down into the sides or on the bottom. And try to keep that crease exposed, as we'll be adding one more color. Black. Now go and get a clump that's about the size of the orange that you just got. Maybe a little smaller if you'd like. And again, go to your trusty comb and get out all that underfur. Then cut the tips off again. Now go ahead and place it directly on top of that orange and tie it in at the halfway point of those hairs. While you're tying this, make sure not to trap any of the yellow or the orange with your thread, as this creates bulk and lets your fly not be packed as tightly. Then go ahead and advance your thread around all those fibers into the front of the previously stacked hair. If you want, you can go ahead and give a little half hitch right now. An empty pen is useful for that case and this tool. Or if you've got a tool, like if you're rich and you can buy these tools, you can use that too. Or if you have a 3D printer, you could 3D print on it. I've seen that before. It's pretty cool. I don't own a 3D printer or a tool. Now go to your 2 legs. Grab one of the legs and tie it on the far side of the hook. You want that first crease right up against that bend. Right up against the hook shank. So you're tying it at the first little twist, right where it connects the little bubble to the hook eye, with the orange facing up. And do the same to the far side. Okay, you twisted it 3 or 4 times, all of those twists are going to be on the hook shank, with just that little bubble sticking off, and then the hook eye connected to that bubble. Now you could have cut the deer hair before you added the legs, and it would have been a little bit easier to add the legs, but I like keeping the deer hair long. You can add some super glue at this point too. Keeping the deer hair kind of like increases the flow. Now follow the pattern of the stacked deer hair that we just did 2 more times. Past those legs. We're going to do the yellow, yellow, orange, black, and then yellow, yellow, orange, black again until you reach the eye. This may differentiate between the hook sizes you're using, but if you want to, you can try to keep it constant with getting larger clumps of deer belly hair. Make sure when you're adding, you're pushing the previous fibers back as you're not trapping them. And again, pushing down every time you use a new color and exposing that crease, that top crease where your thread went through. That way you're not kind of adding it over and over and kind of like stacking them, kind of like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Keeping that crease kind of helps them all stacked on top of each other flush. So now we have 2 sections down. Again, advance your thread. And kind of push the hair back. You can do a couple of half hitches and add super glue as you like, as kind of like a way to save your progress. When you get to the eye, sometimes it's helpful to pull down and a little bit back towards the bend instead of just straight down. This kind of helps the deer hair kind of like make sure it gets straight on the shank and you're not kind of missing it with your thread. Now kind of push the thread. If you have a fugly packer or any kind of hair packer, you can use that right now. Because the eye of the hook may be unexposed and you need to push that back. Once you've exposed the eye, go ahead and try to jump your thread up. It is really helpful with a whip finish here, as sometimes it's hard, it's really helpful for a half hitch here, as sometimes it's really hard to whip finish, and sometimes it's just hard to wrap your thread around without that extra tube to kind of get it around the hook eye. Now go to a double-edged razor blade and carefully break it in half. Don't slit your fingers, is what I'm saying. Then invert your hook if you can, or take it off and invert it. And now, kind of starting shallow and increasingly getting more deep into the deer hair without cutting your thread, go ahead and cut at a straight angle, not really an angle, just a 180 degree angle if you want to say that, but straight across, leaving a flat surface, exposing that hook gap, as that's going to be important for hooking the fish. This creates a nice belly. Again, make sure not to cut any of your thread in the back, and don't cut your weed guard either. Now reinvert your hook and add a shallow angle, well, kind of not steep, at a steep angle, cut up. It depends on which way you're looking at it. A shallow angle if you're looking at it from the perpendicular of the hook eye, but steep if you're looking at it horizontally. And now we're going to kind of make a teardrop shape. Kind of start with an arrow around the head, a broad arrow around the head, 45 degree angle left, 45 degree angle right, and kind of a slightly shallower angle up. And then kind of an angle down once you get up. So on the top, it's going to be at about a 20 degree angle down. For starters, you always want to start shallow and then get deeper. And then we're going to kind of make a pentagon or a teardrop shape around the legs. So there's going to be a little stout end about halfway into the body, and then we're going to cut in towards the legs, making sure not to cut the legs. Again, you can eventually go to scissors too if you don't want to use it all for you don't want to use the razor blade for all of it. Sometimes scissors are a helpful tool. Kind of round out all the edges that you get, because these are just all rough cuts right now. Got to round that top off, Because this is kind of like a diving bug. It's kind of like a popping or diving bug. It just kind of make like a, it's just meant to make like a wake through the water. You can't dive it because it's got that shallow angle of a head. Gives it a little pop if you just twitch it a little once. But yeah. And then go ahead and like pull the legs to the side and cut all the way down. Again, you can use scissors here or a razor blade. Just make sure not to cut your weed guard. And kind of angle all that deer hair down into the butt. And that will complete like our teardrop shape. So the fattest part of the teardrop is going to be towards our eye of the hook, while the kind of the skinniest part is going to be at the bend of the hook. And it's going to get wider closer to the eye. It's going to be its widest about 1/3 of the hook shank back from the hook eye. And then it's going to taper towards the bend and taper towards the eye. And then once you give it a once over, I usually spend like 15 minutes trying to perfect it, but I won't subject that to you. Now go to like 3 still attached medium round rubber legs, because these come in like a 3. They comes in like a whole thing and they're still attached. It doesn't come in a hank. It comes like all connected. And then knot one end. Again, this whole thing's like 4 to 5 inches because it's easier to work with excess. Now go to a large needle. And about that 1/3 section back from the eye of the hook shank, 1/3 of the hook shank back from the eye, go ahead and push that down into the deer hair as deep as you can get it and out the other side. Now you can either use a bobbin threader or your thread and kind of like make a loop around in through the eye and back out, but keep that loop there, as if you've ever threaded a needle with rubber legs, it's pretty hard. Now go to the unknotted section and thread that unknotted section with the help of the loop of your thread or bobbin threader through the eye of the needle and pull it out the other side. And then keep pulling until the knot is about 1/2 hook shank extending past the body of the fly. And then go ahead, at that same measurement, go ahead and knot the other side. Now if you're tying these in bigger sizes, I like to use more rubber legs. But since this is size 4, I only use 3. If it's a size 2, I'll use like 4 rubber legs. Okay, and then cut the fingers about like 1/4 of a hook shank in length, or like half of the length between the body and the knot of the rubber legs. And then go ahead and pull out all the little fingers. Not necessary, but it kind of gives it a pleasing aesthetic. Now go to any kind of plastic bag. Hard plastic bags work better. Well, still flexible, but like if you're using a Ziploc bag, I'd rather use like a gallon bag than like a sandwich bag, because gallon bags are like kind of tougher. We're kind of looking for that tougher plastic, but it's still yellow. This was a bag that held rubber legs. But like any of the bags that your fly tying supplies come into, like the polypropylene yard bags, work really well. And poke a hole in it. And then slide that hole through the eye. And kind of like position it again with your half-hitch tool. Very important. If you have one, use the half-hitch tool. If you don't, 3D printer, whatever. And then start your thread again. Again, using the half-hitch tool. Once your thread is started, which may take a while, you can give a couple whip finishes to really make sure that that thread's on there. Go ahead and cut your tag end off. And now that plastic will help when you're tying the thread off. And it'll help you not catch any deer hair. Now kind of like take your hook off the vise and slide that monofilament through that vise and out over there. And then take one tip and up through the eye of the hook. Make a nice weed guard that's just extending past the point of your hook. It's just going to be a little bit deeper than the hook point. And kind of fold it all back with the help of the plastic. Give a couple turns around behind the monofilament. And then again, go to your trusty half-hitch tool or a pen if you're poor, whatever. And then go ahead and give a couple half-hitches. Directly on top of that monofilament. It may be a little tricky because that stuff is slippery, but you just keep at it and you'll eventually get a nice secure head. Once you start to secure, you can go ahead and cut your thread off. And then if you have any excess monofilament, go ahead and cut that off. And now you can go ahead and cut that plastic off too. That's not part of the fly, that was just a help. Now go to some 5/32 of an inch googly eyes and some gel super glue. Not the super glue we used before. The super glue we used before was helpful for sinking into stuff. This kind of will like gel up, and it helps with setting the eyes. So we're going to put a drop on the eye and then kind of put it on the front half of the fly, near the top. And we're going to kind of push that into the deer hair to set the glue. And then we're going to do the same to the near side. Now we're going to go to a black Sharpie marker, or Copic marker, whatever mark you have, just not ones that are washable, not Crayola. Okay, now go ahead and give like 3 or so bars on like the front half, and then a couple 4 or 5 on the back half of the leg. You can even color the thread now if you'd like, but the fish don't care. Now go to some regular super glue, not the gel, the stuff that seeps in. It's kind of liquid. It's just regular super glue. Now you can coat the whole fly if you like, but I kind of like to coat the legs from like the back of the leg to just a little bit past the thread collar. This kind of like stiffens them up and makes them super durable, and like you'll catch a lot more fish if you do this. And basically once that glue is set, you're done with the fly and it's ready to be fished. Go ahead and cut any spare ones, make it your own. If you see anything wrong with it, fix it.